Labour's so-called Brexit reset is a move to re-enter the EU by stealth. The Prime Minister's proposed agricultural alignment with Brussels would see Britain again bound to the European Union's food and farming regulations, and we'd have no say. Now, a pro-growth think tank has warned that this deal would hinder trade, eliminate our post-Brexit free trade arrangements, and inflict a £15 billion cost to the British economy. With growth desperately needed, why is the government volunteering to pay such a high price to give power over regulations back to Brussels? Well, I'm very pleased to be joined by the chairman of the Growth Commission and former government advisor on trade, Shanker Singham. Shanker, thank you for coming in.
Very good to be here, Jacob.
The government maintains that if we do a deal with Europe, we have a reset, it will make billions for the British economy, and the anti-Brexit people say we've lost 8% of the economy by leaving. You're now saying, actually, a reset's nonsense and it'd be 15 billion of extra cost. How do you come to that conclusion?
Yeah, so, I mean, the models that we've used in the Growth Commission are in this book, which I'll share with you. But this is the latest, my fourth book on distortions and the economic modelling that we use. So essentially, what we're doing is we're looking at the cost of regulation, and we're looking at the regulatory headroom that the UK would have. So we're looking at the negative impact of European regulation and comparing that with where the UK might be if it chose to diverge from European regulation. So this £15 billion cost includes actually the benefits of aligning to European regulation, because, you know, clearly a trade from GB into the EU is made slightly more facilitated, and that is a benefit. But that benefit is overwhelmed by the damage to the UK economy in terms of having and tying yourself to anti-competitive regulation. The EU's SPS regime, it's called, is the most...
And that's on food.
That's on food. The food and agricultural regulation is the most anti-competitive regulation really in the whole European regulatory toolkit, which is saying a lot. 31 countries in the WTO have complained about it. Many countries have won WTO cases about it. If you talk to the Australians or the New Zealanders or the Americans or the Canadians, they will all say that it violates WTO rules. It's done an amazing job of unifying the world. Latin America, India, US, Canada, Australia, they all don't like this regulation. Now, we're going to tie ourselves to it. That has a regulatory cost. It also has an additional cost, which we modelled, which is because these countries don't like it, it's going to make trade deals for the UK much, much harder to do. We did a great job. I mean, all credit to the government, did a great job negotiating with the US, with the Trump administration, getting a deal first in the line to lower the US tariff that Trump imposed, and particularly with pharmaceuticals to lower that tariff, which was going to be 100%. Down to zero. But that deal is paused because the Americans have concerns about the UK's regulatory system, and they have concerns about what we're doing with the EU. And if that causes our pharmaceutical industry to have to pay 100% tariffs, the damage is far bigger than the 15 billion that we projected. And it's difficult to see how you can remain in some of the trade deals that we've negotiated if you don't have control over your regulatory system.
Because regulations are the other side of the coin of tariffs, aren't they? That you have tariff barriers and you have non-tariff barriers. Tariff barriers have come down by and large, but non-tariff barriers have remained. But to what extent have we used the benefit of Brexit to open up our market? Because if we're still broadly as regulated as Europe, if we realign with Europe, we're losing something that we might have rather than losing something that we've got. Which situation is it?
We're losing opportunity cost. But there's two things. There's opportunity cost of improving our regulatory system. And clearly, the biggest gain of not being subject to the European system is to improve your regulatory system. What our model shows is actually the improvement of your domestic regulatory system has a much bigger effect, probably double the effect of trade, border improvements. So there's that cost. There's also the direct cost. If, as a result of this, it compromises our relationship with other trading partners. The only world where this would make sense is a world where the only entity that the UK trades with is the EU, and the EU's regulatory system is the best one could possibly have. In that world, absolutely, aligning would make a lot of sense.
What you're actually saying is the UK domestic economy would be stronger if we deregulated, even if that meant we couldn't trade with the EU.
Well, we can always trade with the EU. I mean, if you're going to ship agricultural products to the EU, you have to satisfy European regulations. That's clear. The issue is there's additional paperwork in order to trade, and that's where the friction is. That's where the cost is. But there are lots of other things we can do. So you have to think about, what is the problem we're trying to solve? So if the problem is keeping supermarkets stocked with produce, well, we can easily do that by unilaterally recognising European regulations and standards for the bulk of the agricultural trade, which is EU into GB. And we've done this for medicines. We've unilaterally recognised medicine approvals for the US, the EU and Japan. So if you can do it for medicines, you can do it for anything. And that would take out the bulk of the trade. Northern Ireland, we have the Windsor Framework, we have some facilitations, could be better, but it's nevertheless, there are facilitations there. So the only thing we're really worried about is GB into EU. And that's where these frictions actually exist. And that's why we've advocated a mutual recognition agreement along the lines that the New Zealanders did with the EU on equivalent. So essentially, our agricultural regulations are never going to be completely different. We're always going to want to protect animal health and human health and so forth. So our objectives are going to be the same always as
even if we do it in different ways. One thought I want from you, and that's on gene editing, which is allowed in the UK and not effectively in the EU. Does that have an important cost to UK agriculture, or is it de minimis at the moment?
No, it's an important cost because, gene editing, and it's not just gene editing, a lot of innovative technology that's applied to agriculture is not allowed in the EU and is allowed in the rest of the world. And, one of the things that will lower farmers' costs significantly and improve their production and their productivity is precisely this kind of innovative technology. And that's where the problem, will occur.
And if we had a reset, that would go. We know tangibly that we would lose an economic benefit.
You'd lose that. You'd lose a lot of other. There are a lot of products that, the EU has a very restrictive view of what is allowed, what farmers are allowed to use as they produce their crops. I think farmers tend to be the best judge of what makes sense and what doesn't make sense, because they have to sell ultimately to supermarkets and ultimately to the British public, and they're not going to do themselves out of a business. So it's a slew of different things that relate to technology and innovation and all of these things. One of the things I just testified to a congressional committee in the US on some of these issues, and there was a European commentator who actually said, "Well, Europe is an open-air museum. It's a museum of world farming because they don't allow any of these."
Museum of World Farming is a good point to end on. Shanker, thank you so much for coming in.